Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Today, let's take a deep dive into the Neural Quad Cortex. Today we're taking a close look at the Neural Quad Cortex. Now there's been a lot of hype about this box, and that hype is all justified. It does an incredible amount. In fact, it basically serves as tone central for guitarists, for bassists. You could run vocals through this. It's an audio interface. It'll capture other pieces of gear that you can bring in and use inside your presets. It even has built-in Wi-Fi. Let's take a closer look. Let's begin by taking a look at the input and output complement on the Quad Cortex. We begin with two inputs that are on combi jacks. Now these jacks can accept regular quarter-inch cables like you'd have from a guitar or a bass. It can accept balanced TRS inputs, and it can also accept microphone levels. Now when you plug a microphone in, you can even engage 48-volt phantom power, so you can use this with condenser mics or with active ribbon microphones. We have two effects loops on the back panel for integrating with external devices. So for example, you could plug a pedal in here and use it as part of a preset. So we've got two sends and two returns. You can use those either in mono or you could use them in stereo with one device. Next up, we have two TRS outputs. Now, these could be used to feed an FR monitor system on stage, or you could send them into studio monitors in the studio or into a live mixing console, or you could use those to feed to the input or the effects return on a guitar amplifier if you're using a regular guitar amplifier on stage and using the Quad Cortex for effects. The capture output is part of the system that allows us to capture external devices and save their characteristics inside the Quad Cortex and use them in our presets, and we'll look more at that later. We have three more outputs. We have a headphone output, which is fairly self-explanatory, and then we have two XLR outputs, balanced outputs, and those again could be used to feed an FR monitor system on stage. We could send those into an audio interface, into a set of studio monitors. Those are really your main outputs from the Quad Cortex. We have MIDI input and MIDI output, and the MIDI output could be switched to be a MIDI through if you're chaining MIDI devices together. And we have full MIDI implementation for both sending and receiving MIDI commands inside the Quad Cortex, and again, we'll take a look at that a little bit later. We have two expression pedal inputs, and those allow us a lot of real-time control over what's happening inside the Quad Cortex. You can assign an expression pedal to be just about anything that you want, a volume control, a wah pedal to control a different parameter inside an effect, so we have a lot of versatility there. The USB jack really expands the capability of the Quad Cortex. In fact, you can connect it to a computer and use this as an audio interface for recording and playing back signals from your computer. And finally, we have the power connection on the back panel. To get started with the Quad Cortex, just connect the power cable. The device will boot up and it'll be ready to go. When you're ready to turn off, there's a power switch here on the upper left, or my upper left anyway, with cancel, shut down, reboot, which basically restarts the unit, and standby, which sort of puts it to sleep like a computer would. Our main volume control is also here on my upper left. And an important control is the tuner control, and that's this bottom switch here that also does tap tempo for us. When you press and hold that, the Quad Cortex will switch into tuner mode. Now, of course, like everything with the Quad Cortex, we have options even with the tuner. We can set the frequency, and you can dial that using this control, or you can tap to enter the frequency directly. You also can turn the knob on the front panel. You also can choose which input the tuner is accepting signal from. In this case, I'm set to input 1 because that's where I have my guitar connected on the back panel. When you're finished with the tuner, simply hit the button again and you'll return to the screen you were on before. Navigating the Quad Cortex is very easy. In fact, I think you'll find that you rarely need to crack the manual. Everything is right here on this huge multi-touch display. One thing to know is that the main menu, where all the settings are, is here on the upper right. An important one is CPU monitor, which shows you how much of the processing power inside the Quad Cortex you're using. We can exit out of that. And we'll revisit that menu a little bit later to look at some of those other settings that are important for the Quad Cortex. Two other features of the display. One, you can swipe down from the top, which shows us our I/O complement, as well as the settings for each of those inputs and outputs. Now you can tell what's connected and what's not connected by the color of the different jacks. So for example, USB is connected here, it's white, but we don't have anything in the expression pedal, so it's grayed out. The one I have actually selected is green. So I've clicked on input 1, which is where my guitar is connected, and you can see the different parameters for that. We can set the input level, we can set the impedance, which is important with some passive pickups. We can set whether we have a mic or an instrument coming in, phantom power for using a microphone. We can lift ground if we're having ground loop problems. And we also have a level meter, and I think this is really cool. There are a lot of these inputs and outputs that display the level, and that tells you when signal's passing through. I've found this very useful as I've worked with the Quad Cortex. So as you're playing, you can see exactly what's happening with the level from each of those connections. So we can look at our inputs, we can look at our sends, and again, we have send levels, we have a limiter we can engage, we have returns. When we choose headphones, it's got its own level control. The XLRs have their own level control, metering, limiters. MIDI out allows us to select whether it's MIDI out or MIDI through. On the expression pedals, we can set the range, and we'll look at that a little bit later. We even have settings for the USB connection, so we can see the levels of the different channels that are feeding in and out using USB to our computer. When we're finished with the I/O, click Done, and we're back to our main screen. We can also swipe up on the screen. This opens up what's called Gig View, and we'll talk more about this later, but it shows you what's happening under each of the foot switches here on the front panel. Finally, the other thing that makes navigating on the Quad Cortex very easy is that each of these foot switches is also a rotary control. So when we open up parameters and we're adjusting them, or we're making a setting or whatever, we simply turn these, and it's very easy to input the settings that you want. I mentioned earlier that the tuner function is under the tap tempo button. Just hold that button down and the tuner comes up. But when you do double tap for tap tempo, a menu opens up. You can manually adjust the tempo. You can also select one of 3 different modes for tempo. We have global, which assigns the same tempo to all the presets. We have scene, which allows you to have a different tempo program per scene. And you can also assign a different tempo per preset. So even the tempo function inside the Quad Cortex is extremely flexible. And again, when we're finished, just hit Done and we return to our main screen. We have 256 presets available inside the Quad Cortex, and those are arranged as 32 banks of 8. We have switches A through H for each bank. We move through the banks using the up-down switches here. A little bit later, we'll look at ways you can organize those presets into different set lists, and also how you can create different sets of banks of presets, so you can have a ton of presets inside the Quad Cortex. This main display we're looking at here on the Quad Cortex is called the grid. And this is where we do all our programming, where we set up all our effects, our amp emulations, our cabinet simulators, and so on. So let's create a new preset and take a look at how all this works. When we create a new preset, it opens up as a blank grid. And we have 4 rows here that we can use for inserting different effects blocks. Now our inputs and outputs can also be assigned to each of those rows. So we could assign our outputs here by simply clicking on Outputs. If we scroll up, we're currently assigned to output 1 and 2, but we could switch that to 3 and 4, to sends. We could send just to USB. If we scroll down, we can choose any of those as mono outputs. We can also output from each row into the input of another row, which allows for extremely complex presets. Or we could turn a row completely off by choosing Not in Use. The same thing holds on the input. Just click the input and we can assign that. To create a preset, we basically add processing blocks into a row or into rows. You can do that by clicking the plus or click anywhere on the row. The menu will open up giving you the different device types. So we have amps, neural captures, cabs, overdrives, delays, reverbs, compressor, pitch, modulation, filter, EQ, wah, effects loops, and utility. So we have a lot of different possibilities there. But let's go back up here and choose an amplifier. We can scroll through all the many different options that are in here. We'll choose the Freeman Rhythm. Now when we click on that block, we can get the parameters for it by simply tapping on that block. So you can see we have gain control, voicing control, EQ controls, and so on. The second page gives us an output control. We can bypass this block if we want to, turn it back on. When we're finished, simply click Done. Now at this point, we've just got the raw amplifier. There's no speaker on there, it's just the amplifier itself. So we want to add a cabinet as well. So let's click next to that, choose Cabinet, and again, we have a wide range of different cabinets to choose from. Let's scroll down here, we'll choose a Bogner with vintage 30s. And again, we have parameters there. Now in this case, the parameters include the microphones that we're using on that cabinet, where they're positioned, the level of each. So we have 2 different microphones. In this case, we've got an SM57 and a Biodynamic Ribbon 160 assigned. They're basically set up in identical positions in this case, but we could move the ribbon mic back a little bit if we want to. We could pan it off to one side, pan the SM57 off to the other side. We can also adjust the relative volumes of the 2 microphones and so on. And we can change the microphones to a different mic as well. You could use the arrows to move back and forth or click right on the name and it'll open up a menu that displays your choices. Now notice down here on the bottom, Load IR. You can put your own impulse responses inside the Quad Cortex and use them here on your speaker cabinets. Let's go ahead and add a reverb after our amplifier. So if we click here, we'll choose a reverb. Let's choose a hall, and we'll put that in. We can adjust the parameters again. We can set our delay time. We can do that by either just clicking and pulling, or we can turn the knobs that are assigned to each of the different parameters. We can also click the contextual menu here, which allows you to change to a different device if you don't like the one you've selected. You can reset to default settings. You can set these parameters as a default. And this is also where you can assign an expression pedal to any of the parameters. And finally, you can remove the block from the grid here as well. Now, once you have your blocks in place here, they aren't necessarily fixed where they are. So we could, for example, drag that reverb in front of our amplifier. We could put it between the amp and the speaker. Or we can put it at the end of the chain. Pull to the upper right, we can remove it completely. So let's put our reverb back in place here. We'll choose that again. We've got a hall, but let's turn our decay time down. Pre-delay is fine. Let's turn our mix down a bit though. Notice we have a trail switch here on the reverb. Trails can be either on or off when you bypass the effect. But the routing doesn't have to be just straight through a row like this. For one thing, we could add another row, input 1, going to, again, outputs 1 and 2, and set up a completely different path with an entirely different amplifier. So maybe we could set up a, let's put a Plexi Bright on this side, and we'll put a Deluxe Tweed 10-inch. So now we have two different paths running simultaneously in parallel from this input to those two outputs. Now you may have noticed when I click on a block that there are a lot of possibilities for adding different effects in here. In fact, we have 8 slots on each of these rows, so you can have up to 64 different effects running simultaneously on a single signal path. But we can also split the signal and run effects and amplifiers and cabinets in parallel that way. So if we simply click and hold basically anywhere, we can open up a splitter. Now this could be a simple splitter like this. It's basically a Y. We can set our output here to either the same output, or we could set up a completely different output path. We'll choose the same one. And now we could put different effects on this one. Maybe we'll put a delay down here. We'll make it a mono tape delay. We can choose where the split point is taking place. So let's put it after our amplifier, but before the reverb. So now our signal is coming in, it's hitting the amplifier, hitting the cabinet, then it's splitting. One side is going to the reverb and out, one side is going to the delay and out. This allows for very complex routings, and you can see there are different ways to split the signal. We can do a simple Y like we did here. We can do a loop that brings things back in. We can do a longer loop, or we can bring two inputs and blend them together and send them out. Because the M here actually stands for mixer. So you can see we have the level and the pan for the two different sides of the split. Level A, pan A. Level B, pan B. We can invert the phase if we're having phase problems, and we can set the overall level for the mixer. So again, very flexible routing possibilities here. If we go back to the splitter side, we can look at the different types of splitters. Balance allows us to set the relative balance between the two sides of the splitter. AB allows us to independently set the level of the two sides, and crossover allows us to split the two sides by frequency. So low frequencies can continue down one path, while high frequencies go to the other, and you can process them independently. This allows for some awesome effects. We have two different stereo modes. In split, we can have the left go to one side and the right go to one side. And in normal, both sides continue down each path. We can balance between the two sides of the path, and again, we can set our levels, frequencies if we're using the frequency type of splitter, and so on. Having those 4 rows and multiple inputs and outputs also allows us to process multiple sources simultaneously. So say we have this set up as our stereo guitar sound. We could come in down here on input 2, bring a microphone in, and run our vocal through, send it out of outputs 3 and 4, and we could apply just a reverb and an EQ on our vocal. Modulated reverb, and then we'll go ahead and add a EQ. Graphic 9 would be great there. So now we have a graphic EQ to apply. So we have 2 completely different independent processing chains happening here. One for guitar and one for vocal down here. Here's a quick tip for you. We have a ton of processing power inside the Quad Cortex, but it's not completely unlimited. So the way this is set up is rows 1 and 2 have a dedicated set of processing, and rows 3 and 4 have a separate set of processing. So if you want to make maximum use of the processing power inside the Quad Cortex, put some of your blocks in rows 1 and 2, and some in 3 and 4, either using splitters or multiple inputs and outputs, however you want to route things, and you more efficiently use the processing power inside the box. When you finish with your preset, you can save it. Simply click actually it's a floppy disk icon here. You can type in a name. This might be MG preset. You can tag it however you like and then save it. The green check mark shows you that the preset's been saved. If you modify something, you'll see there's an asterisk here, and that'll tell you that the preset needs to be saved. So just click again, and it'll be saved for you. But actually, even if you move off the preset before saving, you haven't lost what you've done because the Quad Cortex has undo and redo for just about any function or change right on the touchscreen. Now, speaking of presets, there are 3 different ways you can use the Quad Cortex. One is in preset mode, which is the way we've been set up so far. We've got one preset here. It's a clean preset. We've got a preset here with a bit more gain. We've got one here with a washy reverb. There's one down here with high gain. And then there's the preset we just created under 1F. But that's not the only way you can use the Quad Cortex. We can also use it in scene mode or in stomp mode. So let's go up to a preset I created here called Dual Amps. This is based on one of the factory presets. You can see this is a very complex preset. We've got 2 different signal chains that are processing the signal in parallel. So we've got a set of amps, cabinets, EQs, and processing up here, and another set down here. They're both feeding from that same input 1 and feeding to the same outputs. So we've basically got 2 paths running in parallel. Now we could create other presets that are variations on this, but if we're using this as the main preset for our song, and we want to step to a slightly different variation, say turn the reverbs on and off for a different section of the song, or maybe we're going to turn the drive on and off for a section of the song, we can do that using scene mode. Now in scene mode, basically what you have is 8 variations on that main preset. So 3A is our main preset. In this case, we've got a noise gate at the beginning of the chain. Second up, we've got a compressor at the top. Down at the bottom here, we've got a digital delay, which is giving us a little bit of a stereo split. We've got an overdrive on each of the signal paths. We've got an amplifier on each of the signal paths. We've got a reverb on each of the signal paths. They're slightly different. We've got 2 cabinets on each of the signal paths. And finally, we have an EQ, a parametric EQ on each signal path. Now, during the course of a song, say we're using this as our sound for the intro. But we want to turn off the overdrives for our verse section where the sound's a little cleaner. We simply press and hold the switch, and now it'll tell us we can copy that scene to a new destination. So if we just press a foot switch, now that setting has been copied over onto scene B. And we can make changes here. So we could turn off the overdrives. Save. Now under scene A, we have the preset with reverb off and the overdrives on. Under B, we've got the overdrives off. You can hear the gain drops down there. I've saved a scene under C that has reverbs on with the overdrives on. And so on. So it's very easy to set up variations on that preset. Basically, you create your rig and then use scenes to switch among those different settings. So it gives you 8 possibilities. We can still move through presets by using our up-down switches. And we can tell what scene we're on by the letter up here at the upper right. I mentioned gig view earlier where you swipe up from the bottom. If we do that in scene mode, we can see the scenes that are under each of our 8 foot switches. Very useful on stage or in the studio for that matter to be able to quickly move among them. Now, in addition to bypassing and engaging different blocks with different scenes, we can also have completely different parameter settings. So we might have one parameter setting here. Let's copy our preset to H. Now, when we go to H, we can set up completely different parameters. So let's take our overdrive and run that level way, way lower. Run the level, tone, level, way, way lower. Done. We can also engage reverb just on one side. So we could have basically a completely different set of settings for all of our blocks and save it under that scene. Now we can go from A to H and have a very different sound. So it's not just the status of the individual effects, but also the settings for those effects that can be saved as parts of scenes. In fact, I set up a preset for one of the songs off my EP when I'm playing it live. So this is the intro. Now I'm using this with a 4-cable method where I'm using the Quad Cortex both in front of and in the effects loop of my amplifiers, but I've got it set up with stereo delays on the first scene. The second scene adds in an external overdrive box. The third scene adds in chorus and also changes the settings so that we've got a very long delay, a very washy kind of a sound. The fourth setting is my lead tone, so it engages a gain boost here at the beginning. This is a very convenient way to manage all of the presets, all of the sounds that you need for a particular song. Our third mode for operating the Quad Cortex is what's called Stomp Mode, and basically that turns the Quad Cortex into a pedal board. So if we go back to our dual amps setup here, if we change to Stomp, and now we swipe up to Gig View, the individual effects are now arrayed on our foot switches and we can turn them on and off in real time. So, and one of the settings when we look at the parameters for a block is where it's assigned on the foot switches. So we can choose where each of our effects are arrayed on these different foot switches. I mentioned earlier using an expression pedal to control parameters or different settings inside the Quad Cortex. I've connected a Boss expression pedal here. Let's pull down our input and output. The first thing we need to do is calibrate that. You can see I've connected it into input 1, expression pedal input 1, because it's turned white. If we click on that, it turns green, and now we can calibrate this by setting the down and the up. And once we've finished, we can save. Once we have our expression pedal connected and calibrated, click the contextual menu, assign expression pedal. We'll choose expression pedal 1, connect, and now we can assign that. Let's assign that to our output for that amplifier. So now our output is under control of the expression pedal. We could also set up a wah pedal, insert it into our signal path, and control that from the expression pedal, or just about any other parameter. This gives you a lot of real-time control, and it's super easy to set up. When we talked about the inputs and outputs on the Quad Cortex, I mentioned that you can integrate external pedals using effects loops. We have 2 effects loops on the Quad Cortex. So I've connected a J-Rocket Dude into effects loop 1, which is send 1 and return 1. Now to use this in our signal path, we simply click Data Block. We'll choose effects loop. We're plugged into effects loop 1. And now we've got our Dude pedal integrated. Now the problem is that at this point, it's actually after the delay on one side here. But remember, we're not stuck with any particular order. We simply click on this, and now we can drag it to the beginning of our chain. If we bypass that, so very easy to integrate external pedals into your presets. While we've got the Dude pedal here, let's take a look at one of the other major features of the Quad Cortex, which is capture. Capture allows you to basically capture the characteristics of a device, whether an amplifier, a speaker cabinet, an effects pedal like this, and store them inside the Quad Cortex, and then use them as an effects block for processing your signals. So we can actually capture the characteristics of this Dude pedal and store it as an effects device. Let's take a look at how this works. One thing to be aware of here, and that's that capture can't capture something that happens in the time domain. So it doesn't work with delay pedals or chorus pedals or flangers or reverbs or those type of things. It's going to work at pedals that operate on the tone that you're creating. So overdrive pedals, boosts, distortions, amplifiers as we mentioned, speaker cabinets, EQs, those types of things, you can capture their characteristics and store those inside, but not time-based effects. To start the process, we go back to our main menu, scroll down to New Neural Capture. To do the capture, we need to change our routing just a little bit as far as our cable connections. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we'll do is disconnect our Dude pedal. Our instrument input goes to return 1. The input to the dude connects to the capture output, so we can send out and go through it. And then the return, or the output from the dude, goes back in to input 1. And you'll notice that the Quad Cortex gives you directions that step you right through the process. So we've connected our instrument to return 1, hit next. We've got our main outputs already connected. Now we need to connect our capture out to the input of our dude, which we've done. And then we bring the output from the dude back to the input. Now at this point, we hit next, and now we can confirm. We can set our levels here. If we need to change those, choose whether we have a mic or an instrument. If we're miking up a cabinet, we would use that setting here. We have phantom power for using a microphone. We can start the capture. The Quad Cortex goes through its thing. Basically, it's sending a whole wide range of different sounds and signals and impulses through the dude to capture its characteristics and then recording those back in. So initially it does calibration. You can see at this point, it's working its way through a bunch of signals that are being used for modeling. And then it'll set itself up. The sanity check is actually where it's assigning all those characteristics to the DSP inside the box. And then training is where we'll actually be able to hear the results so we can compare the modeled dude with the real dude. So it's very simple to do this with a pedal. All we need is a couple of 1/4-inch cables. But again, we could do this with an amplifier or a speaker cabinet as well. In that case, we'd send the capture out to the input of the amplifier. We put a microphone or microphones onto the amplifier and either route them through preamps or a mixer, whatever we need to do to get the signals together, and then bring that back into input 1 to capture an amplifier sound. Now, when you do that, you also take into account the microphones that you're using because they're part of that capture. You definitely want to experiment with different microphones as you're capturing your amplifiers. Try an SM57, try a Royer ribbon microphone, whatever your usual combination is, different preamps. Get the sound exactly the way you want it, and then capture it back in. So you can pretty much capture any amplifier, any cabinet, any drive or tone shaping pedal very easily using the Quad Cortex. So at this point, we've gone through calibration, recording signals, sanity check, and it's now training itself as to how that model works. You can see the progress bars going here. We're at 73%, so we're almost there. Once the Quad Cortex has done its thing and it's captured the model of the dude, now we can compare the real dude to the modeled dude. And we do that using the reference switch. So if we play here, we're comparing the hardware dude with the modeled dude. As you can hear, they're really close. Now, we're not going through any amplifier modeling or anything here. You're just hearing the raw pedal going straight through, so it doesn't sound quite like it will when you're using it in a signal path. But still, the idea is that we can compare the original with the captured version, and man, it's really close. In fact, it's so close that I'd be hard-pressed to tell which was which. When you're happy with the results, hit Save. And now you can name this. We'll name it Dude. You could add tags if you want to make it easy to find when you're searching. And you can save that. So now it's been saved. And now we can exit from this screen. We can verify that we've captured this and that we've saved it by looking at the directory. And the directory gives us a lot of other information as well. So if we click on the preset name, we can see recent presets. We can see favorites that we've assigned. We can access the factory library, which is here. You can access your presets, which is what we've been working on. We also have factory captures, which are things that they've done of cabinets and drives and things. And then there's my captures, and you can see our dude is right here on the top of the list. We can also look at any impulse responses that are loaded. And this is where you also access the Quad Cortex Cloud. The cloud allows you to share presets and impulse responses and captures with your friends. You can upload them, you can download them, you can save just with your friends, or you can make them public. So this is a way to also back up everything that you have inside your Quad Cortex in case there's ever a problem and you need to recover that data. To use the capture of the dude, we simply insert a capture block. So let's go over here. We select Neural Capture, go to My Captures, and Dude is right here at the top of our menu. Shows up right here. Once we have our capture in the position we want, we can click on it to access its parameters. Let's bypass. This is our clean sound. When we engage the effect, we have the capture of our dude pedal. Now we can adjust the gain, the bass, the middle, the treble. Sounds a little dark. Let's turn that up. Set our volume. We could set our gain. and when we're finished, we can save our preset. So this is a very fast way to integrate all of your favorite overdrives and tone shaping pedals into the Quad Cortex. But we have even more features with the Quad Cortex. One of those is it can serve as an audio interface in your recording studio. Doing that is as simple as routing a USB cable out of the back and into your computer. I'm connected to a MacBook Pro here, and in fact, all the audio you're hearing is being recorded into Studio One. Simply hook it up by USB, and you have 8 inputs and 8 outputs to your computer using the Quad Cortex. And a cool thing is, you can choose how you're routing the signals. So you could choose to route input 1 directly back into your computer and record the dry, direct signal. Or you could choose to record what's coming out of the outputs and get your process signal. So you could choose to record the DI, reamp later, or record your process signal and be finished right on the first take. You also have 8 signal paths coming back, so you can monitor, you could route through the Quad Cortex. Again, we have those multiple rows, so you could access those. So a lot of flexibility as an audio interface. And I've been using it as an audio interface myself in my studio, and it sounds great. For microphones, for guitars, for basses, anything you want to run through it, it sounds really good. Connect it up to your studio monitors and you're ready to go. We also have full MIDI implementation, and you can access MIDI using the MIDI I/O on the back panel, or you can do MIDI over USB. Now, when you are using MIDI over USB, you need an ASIO driver that you can download and install, but that's very easy to do. And at that point, you can assign pretty much any MIDI message to pretty much anything inside the Quad Cortex. So you could have messages send when you select a preset. You could have each button send a different program change message. And likewise, you can receive all those messages as well. So you have complete control over the Quad Cortex using MIDI. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Quad Cortex. It's an incredible guitar, bass, vocal, and more processor. It really can serve as the tonal centerpiece for your studio and for your live rig. It can do so much for you. I've been using it as an audio interface and guitar processor in my studio. I've also used it in my live rig with my 2 Mesa Boogie Fillmore 50 amplifiers for all my effects processing in stereo. You can use it for capturing your devices, whether they're pedals, whether they're amplifiers, whether they're cabinets. It's an open-ended box that gives you a lot of capability, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. Definitely check it out. There's so much power inside this little unit. Thanks for watching. For more information on the Quad Cortex, visit sweetwater.com or contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click here for more videos like this, or start at sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs.